Story, Philippines podcast.
Have you ever wandered the grounds of a place so steeped in history that the air itself feels thick with memory? Imagine standing before a grand palace, its whitewashed walls reflecting the moonlight, every shadow brimming with secrets. What does it mean for a nation when the very seat of power is haunted, not just by the decisions of its leaders, but by the literal ghosts of its past? What happens when the burden of history becomes too heavy for the living and the dead refuse to let go? Tonight, we venture into the heart of the Philippines, to a place where power and mystery intertwine, where every room tells a story and every shadow might be watching. The Malacañang Palace, the home of presidents, the stage for revolutions, the silent witness to betrayals and victories, and, as you'll soon discover, perhaps the most haunted house in the country. I am Paul, and you are listening to Stories Philippines podcast. Malacañang Palace stands on the north bank of the Pasig River, a sprawling complex of whitewashed facades, balustraded balconies, and echoing courtyards. But its story begins long before the presidents, before the state dinners and televised addresses. In the late 18th century, it was a summer house for a Spanish aristocrat, its name drawn from the phrase Malacañang. There lives a nobleman. Over time, the estate became the official residence of the Spanish governor general, and eventually the seat of American and then Filipino rule. Across the world, places of power become magnets for the unexplained. The White House in Washington is said to be haunted by Abraham Lincoln, while England's Hampton Court Palace is home to the screaming specter of Catherine Howard. The halls of Versailles in France, too, echo with the footsteps of the long-dead Marie Antoinette. But in the Philippines, Malacañang's ghosts are different. Here, the spirits are not just reminders of individuals, but reminders of wounds, colonial violence, betrayal, and unresolved guilt. Let's set the scene. It's a humid evening in Manila. The city is restless. The news is full of political scandal. Investigations swirl around the corridors of power, and the nation waits, tense, uncertain. Within the palace grounds, the air grows heavy as midnight approaches, and the wind carries more than just the scent of the river. Our first story comes from the shadowed paths of Malacañang Park, just adjacent to the main palace. It's a place of gardens and golf courses, but after dark, the familiar becomes strange. Listen to the account of Adrian Elizio, a college student who grew up in one of the staff houses nearby. Adrian was walking home one night, her backpack heavy with textbooks and the residue of a long evening at the computer shop. It was past 11, and the walkway was lit only by the occasional flicker of street lamps. As she neared the old golf course, she saw a boy, no more than 5 years old, running in circles beneath a lamppost. Even in the tropics, sometimes the air turns cold. Adrienne's arms prickled with goosebumps. Who would let a child play at this hour? She tried to ignore the boy, telling herself she was just tired, just anxious to get home. But as she quickened her pace, she heard a soft, almost playful whistle. It was the boy. He beckoned, still in his threadbare tank top and shorts, his face hidden by the shadows. Adrian's fear faded for a moment, replaced by curiosity. Maybe he wanted company, she thought. Maybe he was lost. She stepped closer and the streetlight above them began to flicker. Once, twice, then plunged them into darkness. Suddenly the boy's laugh echoed, a sound both joyful and choked by an undertone of weeping. Adrian turned to run, her heart pounding, but the laughter followed, closer and closer. She reached the iron security gate, gasping for breath, relief washing over her. She thought she was safe until she heard a high-pitched cry. She turned to see the boy's face, a mask of blood, torn and mangled, eyes wide with terror or rage. Adrian screamed. The security guard on duty came running, but by then, the apparition was gone. Adrian's mother never believed the story, but Adrian never again walked home alone after dark. What is it about Malacañang that draws these restless spirits? Why are the children of the park not allowed to linger after sunset? Some say the palace grounds are layered over old cemeteries. Others that the violence of war and revolution left wounds in the very soil. But the stories don't end at the park. Within the palace itself, the tales grow stranger. For generations, palace staff have whispered about the guests who never left. During the long years of the Marcos regime, staff would report seeing men and women disappear into walls, hearing pianos play in empty rooms, watching heavy velvet curtains part with no hand to move them. There is even a story of a capre, a giant from Filipino folklore, known as Mr. Brown, who smoked cigars in the ancient ballet tree near the state entrance. President Benigno Aquino III once admitted he never stayed inside Malacañang proper. The ambience, he said, is not good. He preferred the Bahay Pangarap across the river, despite the inconvenience. The guards told him it wasn't just the squeaky floors or flickering lights. Sometimes, the pianos would play themselves. Sometimes, someone would march down the halls unseen, and no one, it seems, likes to be alone in the palace after midnight. But perhaps the most famous haunted room is the state dining room, the site of lavish banquets, secret meetings, and, according to some, the scene of spectral mischief. Bongbong Marcos, son of the late dictator Ferdinand Marcos, once recalled sleeping in a room adjacent to the dining hall during renovations. At 2 a.m., he awoke to knocking at his door. He opened it. No one was there. Then, one of the antique chairs stacked against the table righted itself, as if an invisible guest had finally arrived. What is it about empty chairs at feasts that unsettles us? In cultures from Ireland to China, an unclaimed seat at the table is an invitation for the dead, for lost ancestors, for the wronged and the forgotten. In Malacañang, every feast is shadowed by those who never left. Why do ghosts gather at the seat of power? Is it unfinished business, or the weight of history pressing down on each and every leader who sits at the head of the table? Submit your stories at storiesphilippines.com. Find show notes and support options in the description. It's easy to imagine Malacañang Palace as just another historical landmark, a symbol, a tourist destination. But inside, the atmosphere changes. The ceilings tower overhead. Sunlight struggles through thick velvet curtains, and every wall is lined with portraits of presidents, each framed in heavy gold. It's as if the building itself is watching, waiting, listening, for the next chapter in its long story. If you ask the palace's long-serving staff, they'll tell you that Malacañang never truly sleeps. The night brings more than silence, it brings uncertainty. Some staff members cross themselves before entering certain rooms. Others leave small offerings or tuck religious medallions above doorways and beneath desks. It's not just superstition, it's survival. One of the palace's most persistent tales centers around Kalayaan Hall, the oldest part of the complex. It was once the main residence during the Spanish and American eras, and its walls have witnessed revolutions, betrayals, and even executions. Today it houses government offices, But sometimes late at night, the lights will flicker on when no one is there. The guards walk their routes, radios crackling, eyes darting from shadow to shadow. There's a story about a steward, Ricardo Santillan, who once supervised the waiters during the Marcos years. He remembered a night when he stood in the reception hall, chatting with another staff member. The door to the music room was left ajar, and Ricardo joked, "What if the door closes by itself?" Even as he laughed, the door swung shut with a heavy thud. They ran downstairs, their laughter now edged with fear. Orion Hall seems to attract the restless dead. Another staff member, Bernadette Cardenas, recalled the piano playing itself in the music room. Sometimes, she said, you could see a chair slowly turning, as if someone invisible had just sat down or stood up. These things always happened between 2 and 3 in the morning, the hour the staff now call the time of the guests. But who are these guests? Some say they are the souls of those killed during World War II, when Japanese forces used the palace as their headquarters. Others believe the ghosts are the spirits of servants and aides who died in service, unrecognized and unremembered. Not all the apparitions are faceless. There are reports of a Chinese manservant appearing to guests and staff, sometimes waking them at 3 in the morning to attend Mass. One Italian visitor swore he was roused by such a man, only to be told the next day that no one matching his description was employed by the palace. This ghost, it turns out, has been seen as far back as the 1940s. Always silent, always polite, always gone before sunrise. And then there is the ghost of President Manuel Quezon himself, pacing the halls during times of crisis, his presence described by some as anxious but never menacing. In fact, some believe Quezon's spirit returns to Malacañang whenever the nation is in turmoil. They say his ghost is a reminder to those in power. The weight of leadership is never theirs alone. But the strangest stories often come from those who have spent their lives within the palace's orbit. Take, for example, the tale of Mr. Brown, the Cape who lives in the ancient Bailite tree at the state entrance. The palace staff call him by different names, but his legend is always the same. He is a giant, dark-skinned figure, always smoking a cigar, watching over the palace grounds. One evening, Mariano Dacuso, a household aide, was reading the newspaper in the tea house. Suddenly he felt himself being lifted, chair and all, toward the ceiling. "Please put me down," he whispered, and as soon as he spoke, he was gently lowered back to the floor. He ran to his colleagues, breathless, convinced he had encountered Mr. Brown himself. Others have seen smoke drifting from the Bailey tree when no one is nearby. Some have even reported hearing heavy footsteps and deep, rumbling laughter late at night. The military men stationed at Malacañang, tough, disciplined, and skeptical, are said to be especially wary of Mr. Brown. Whenever something strange happened, a missing plate, a misplaced letter, an unexplained noise, they would simply shrug and say, "It's Mr. Brown's doing." Stories like these aren't unique to the Philippines. Across the world, old trees and ancient buildings are believed to house spirits. In Ireland, there are tales of the banshee wailing beneath the elder tree. In Japan, the ghostly yuri are said to linger in abandoned castles, their white robes fluttering in the night. But the capre is Filipino, a creature of myth and forest, brought into the very heart of political power. Why do these legends persist? Maybe it's because every society needs a way to explain the unexplainable. Maybe it's a way to remind the living that they are never truly alone. But sometimes the living brush up against the past in ways that are too real to ignore. One night, Ignacio Buñé, who served as the palace press secretary in the early 2000s, found himself alone in his office after a late dinner. He was passing through a maze of hallways, music room, Ramos room, connecting rooms, when he felt the unmistakable sensation of someone following him. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, and always just behind him. Panicked, Bunyé locked himself in his office, only to hear the footsteps draw closer, circling outside his door. He prayed aloud, willing whatever it was to leave him be. Finally, gathering his courage, he flung open the door, only to find another cabinet secretary, equally lost and equally frightened. Was it just nerves, a trick of the acoustics, or something more? Science has tried to explain hauntings as products of stress, isolation, or even electromagnetic fields. Psychologists say that places associated with trauma can provoke visions and sensations in those who visit them. But when so many people share the same story, when the same rooms and corridors keep showing up in nightmares and whispered conversations, it becomes harder to dismiss. Submit your stories at storiesphilippines.com. Access exclusive content on Patreon. Let's step out of the palace itself for a moment and cross Malacañang Road, where the echoes of history refuse to fade. Just a few blocks from the palace gate stands a crumbling mansion, its walls stained with the memories of the Spanish era. The locals call it the Old House, and for decades it has been a place where only the brave dare to linger after sunset. The story comes from Clarice Bernal, who was 13 when her friend Micah brought her to help at the mansion. Clarice's grandmother and aunt worked as housekeepers for the last surviving resident, known simply as the Lady. The Lady was old, older than the house it seemed, her family gone, her world reduced to memories and shadows. As Clarice entered the mansion, she felt the air thicken. The garden was a wild tangle, the stones slick with moss. Inside, the furniture was draped in white sheets, and the only sounds were the sighs of the wind and the creak of ancient floorboards. Clarice tried to shake off her fear, telling herself it was just an old house. But as night fell, the shadows grew deeper. The family decided to sleep in the living room, not daring to climb the stairs. Clarice curled up under her blanket, heart pounding. The silence pressed in from all sides. At around 11, when the house was darkest, she peeked toward the lady's bedroom. There, in the doorway, stood a figure. A woman in a black dress, her hair long and tangled, her face lost in shadow. Clarice hid under her blanket, praying for morning, but sleep would not come. At 1 in the morning, she heard footsteps above them. No one was supposed to go upstairs. The lady's orders were strict. Then came the sound of metal dragging, slow and scraping, as if someone was chained and shuffling across the floor. The steps drew closer, descending the staircase, metal clinking with every movement. Clarice shook with terror, trying to wake Micah, but her friend was lost in unnaturally deep sleep. The footsteps paused at the foot of the stairs. Clarice could feel a presence standing over her, cold and heavy, watching. She must have fainted, because the next thing she remembered was morning. The adults assured her no one had been upstairs during the night. But later, as they ate breakfast in the kitchen, something warm dripped onto Clarice's leg. She looked up. Red liquid was seeping through the ceiling, pooling on the floor. The lady only shook her head, saying, "Perhaps my sisters are restless. They do not like strangers." Clarice left the mansion that day and never returned. The lady passed away within a year, followed soon after by Clarice's relatives who had cared for her. Others whispered that the house was cursed, that the blood from the ceiling was a warning for secrets best left undisturbed. Stories like these remind us that history is not just a list of dates and events. It is a living thing, clinging to places and people, refusing to be forgotten. Back inside the palace complex, the tales grow even more disturbing. There are accounts of apartments and staff quarters haunted by memories of violence. One woman, Bianca Lirio, spent a summer with her father, a palace guard. The building was old, its facade freshly painted, but inside the walls were cracked and the air was stale. Bianca was left alone most days, her only company the stray dogs that roamed the hall. At first it was just the usual complaints, creaking wood, drafts that rattled the windows. But soon Bianca began to hear footsteps she could not explain, the sound of someone moving in rooms that should have been empty. One evening she saw a figure, tall, dressed in white, its face a blur, drift past her door. She tried to rationalize it, to tell herself it was just a trick of the light. But the real terror came later that night when she went to brush her teeth in a distant bathroom. The room was cold, the tiles chipped and stained. As she finished, she glanced at the door and saw the same figure, its face now torn and raw, staring straight at her. Bianca slammed the door, barely able to breathe. When she peeked through the crack, the figure was gone. Later, her mother revealed the building's grim past. It had once been a hospital, and the tiled room was a former morgue. The table in the center with its mysterious drain had once channeled blood from the dead to the gutters below. Not all hauntings are visible. Sometimes history seeps into dreams. There are stories of people who have dreamed themselves into the lives of the powerful only to awaken changed. One woman, Felicity Rivas, dreamed she had become the late dictator Ferdinand Marcos. She found herself at the palace dining table, surrounded by family, gripped by a strange nostalgia and dread. When she awoke, she felt a lingering sense of guilt, a weight she could not name. Dreams like these are not uncommon. Psychologists call it identification haunting, where the subconscious borrows the stories of the past, blending them with personal fears and desires. But in Malacañang, such dreams are almost expected. The palace is a crucible of ambition and regret, and those who enter its orbit are changed by it, sometimes in ways they cannot understand. Throughout the world, places of power carry a burden. The Kremlin in Moscow, the Forbidden City in Beijing, the Tower of London, all are said to be haunted by the ghosts of rulers and revolutionaries. But what makes Malacañang unique is the way its ghosts reflect the nation's wounds. Each apparition, each mysterious knock, each flicker of lights in the Kazan room is not just a haunting, but a reminder. The crimes of history are not easily forgotten, and the weight of leadership is felt not just by the living, but by the dead as well. Follow us on social media for daily folklore facts. Find show notes and support options in the description. Let's linger for a moment on a question that haunts every seat of power. Does the building remember? In the halls of Malacañang, the past is not just preserved in portraits and documents. It is alive, pulsing just beneath the surface. The palace was rebuilt, expanded, and renovated countless times, but each layer only seems to trap more memories. Some say the very stones are saturated with sorrow and longing. The staff know this well. For every new president, there are old caretakers, people like Jaime Escudero, who worked as a night guard for much of his life. Jaime had a routine: patrol the hallways, check the doors, nod to the marble busts of presidents past. But sometimes, in the dead of night, he would hear footsteps echoing just ahead of him. If he sped up, the steps matched his pace. If he stopped, the sound stopped. Jaime said it felt like the palace itself was letting him know he was never alone. One night, Jaime paused in the ceremonial hall, its walls lined with oil paintings and heavy mirrors. The silence was so deep he could hear his own heartbeat. Then, from the far end of the hall, he saw a woman in a long dress, her back turned, her hair pinned up in the style of another century. Jaime started to call out, thinking she was a lost visitor, but before he could speak, the woman glided forward and vanished through the closed doors like mist. Jaime finished his shift with shaking hands and never walked that hall alone again. The palace is not the only place where the echoes of history manifest. In the neighborhoods that surround Malacañang, the line between past and present blurs as well. The old apartments and staff quarters, many built over the ruins of earlier structures, are filled with their own stories. Near the riverbank, the apartment of the Del Rosario family was infamous among the palace guards. Soldiers stationed there reported hearing voices in empty rooms, seeing figures dart past the windows, and feeling sudden chills even on the hottest days. One guard, Roberto del Rosario, described waking up to see a procession of shadowy figures moving silently through the living room. each one pausing at the door as if waiting for someone to join them. Roberto's daughter, Sofia, told of a night when she stayed late to finish her homework. She heard a tapping at the window, followed by the sound of someone calling her name in a whisper. When she looked, there was no one there, only the reflection of her own frightened face in the glass. But perhaps the most chilling story comes from the palace kitchens. The cooks and servers who work late into the night tell of plates that vanish from countertops, of utensils rearranged without explanation, of cold drafts that extinguish candles. One chef, Marco Tiamzon, was known for talking to the kitchen ghosts. He would leave a small bowl of rice by the back door, whispering, "For whoever is hungry." On nights when he forgot, pots would clatter and the pantry door would swing open and shut, as if someone was expressing their displeasure. Marco's most unsettling encounter came one rainy evening. As he was preparing a midnight meal for a late meeting, he heard a soft humming, an old lullaby, coming from the empty corridor outside the kitchen. He followed the sound, heart pounding, and saw a little girl in a tattered dress standing by the pantry, her eyes wide and solemn. Marco asked, "Are you lost?" The girl shook her head and whispered, "I live here." Then she faded into the darkness, leaving only the echo of her song behind. Even the leaders themselves have felt the weight of the unseen. President Aquino, as mentioned earlier, refused to sleep in the palace, citing its heavy, oppressive atmosphere. Other leaders have called for exorcisms, blessings, and ritual cleansings. During the administration of President Corazon Aquino, the palace was exorcised not once but twice. Still, the stories persisted. Why do these hauntings remain despite efforts to drive them away? Some theologians believe that places of immense emotional energy, whether joy or suffering, become thin places, where the barrier between worlds grows fragile. In Malacañang, every triumph and tragedy, every secret deal and public scandal leaves a mark. The dead, it seems, are unwilling to leave the stage of history unfinished. But there is another side to these tales, a sense of responsibility. The ghosts of Malacañang are not just warnings, they are reminders. The empty chair at every feast, the voice in the corridor, the cold touch on your shoulder. These are the echoes of a nation's conscience. For every leader who sits at the head of the table, there is a reminder that power comes with a price. Imagine dining in the state dining room, chandeliers glittering above, the tables set for 40. As you lift your glass for a toast, you notice one chair at the far end, empty, untouched, yet somehow significant. You remember the stories, the warnings, the quiet advice of staff who have seen too much. In that moment, you realize that you are not alone. The past is always present, watching, waiting, whispering. Find show notes and support options in the description. Access exclusive content on Patreon. The symbolism of an empty chair runs deeper than most realize. Across cultures, an unclaimed seat at a ceremonial table is a powerful omen. In ancient Rome, a spare couch was set for the household gods. In Jewish tradition, a cup and chair remained for the prophet Elijah during Passover. In Filipino gatherings, especially in homes touched by loss, a vacant chair can mean much more. A place reserved for ancestors, for spirits, for those whose stories are not yet finished. In Malacañang, the empty chair is both a tradition and a warning. Staff whisper that every important banquet should have at least one place left unoccupied. Not for protocol, not for late arrivals, but for the unseen guests. Some claim that on stormy nights the chair will turn by itself. Others have seen the napkin unfold or the silverware move, as if someone is dining along with the living. The practice persists, not because anyone truly expects a ghost to appear, but because the palace has taught its caretakers that respect for the unseen is respect for history itself. To ignore the empty chair is to invite misfortune, or worse. the attention of those who linger just out of sight. But what do modern investigations say? In recent years, a team of paranormal researchers, led by Dr. Rafael Mendoza, was allowed to conduct a discreet overnight study in certain parts of the complex. They brought electromagnetic meters, infrared cameras, and digital recorders, hoping to explain or debunk the palace's reputation. The results were inconclusive but unsettling. Their recorders picked up unexplained whispers in the ceremonial hall, and the cameras captured faint human-shaped shadows in rooms that were locked and empty. Most chilling of all, in the state dining room, the temperature dropped by 5 degrees during a midnight vigil, and the only movement in the room was the slow turning of a single antique chair. Dr. Mendoza later remarked, "Whatever you believe, the energy inside Malacañang is unique. The layers of history create an atmosphere that is hard to describe but easy to feel. It's as if every important event, every secret, every sorrow is still echoing in the walls." Skeptics, of course, argue that the palace's haunted reputation is nothing more than a product of suggestion. When you're told a place is haunted, your mind starts to find patterns in shadows and sounds. Scientists point to infrasound, low-frequency vibrations caused by old machinery or even nearby traffic, as a culprit for the chills and the sense of being watched. Old buildings are full of drafts, warped floors, and electrical faults. But there's something to be said for collective experience. When so many unrelated people, over so many decades, tell the same stories, it becomes more than just a coincidence. It becomes part of the place, a living myth, woven into the fabric of daily life. For those who work at Malacañang, the supernatural is just another part of the job. Guards cross themselves before patrols. Maids leave small gifts in the corners of rooms. Senior officials have been known to request blessings from priests, pastors, or even shamans. One advisor, Samuel de Vera, insisted that his office be lined with salt and holy water after he saw a pale hand reach from beneath his desk one night. Samuel laughed it off the next day, but he never worked late again. "You don't have to believe in ghosts to respect them," he told a colleague. "Just like you don't have to see the wind to know it's there." But the stories are not all fear and dread. Some speak of the palace ghosts as guardians, protectors of the truth, or silent witnesses to injustice. There are tales of lost documents reappearing just in time to prevent a scandal, or a voice warning a sleepy guard to wake before an intruder arrives. In these moments, the spirits are seen not as tormentors, but as caretakers, keeping watch over a nation's fragile stability. Yet, there is always a sense of unfinished business. The palace is a place where secrets linger, where the weight of decisions made in candlelit rooms still presses on those who follow. The empty chair is not just for the ghosts of the past, but for the future, for the stories that have yet to be told, and the wrongs that have yet to be righted. In every corner of Malacañang, the question remains, who sits at the empty chair? Is it a memory, a warning, or perhaps a promise that no one who enters the halls of power will ever be truly alone? Submit your stories at storiesphilippines.com. Follow us on social media for daily folklore facts. Let's return for a moment to the river outside the palace walls. The Pasig River is more than a boundary, it is a witness. Its waters have seen arrivals and departures, celebrations and tragedies. Some say that on misty mornings, you can glimpse shadowy figures moving along the banks. Old boatmen, soldiers, women in Spanish-era skirts, replaying their final journeys over and over. The river itself is a kind of spirit, shaping the land and the people who live along its edge. In Filipino folklore, rivers are passageways, dividing the world of the living from the world of spirits. The Pasig has always been a place of crossing, and its currents have carried more than water. They have carried secrets. One rainy dawn, a palace maintenance worker named Isidro Evangelista was clearing debris from the riverbank when he heard the sound of weeping coming from the water's edge. He followed the sound and saw a woman, dressed in white, kneeling by the roots of a balete tree. Her hair covered her face. Isidro called out, but she did not move. As he drew closer, the weeping stopped. The woman vanished, leaving only a single white slipper on the muddy ground. Stories like this echo old legends of the White Lady, a spirit caught between worlds, searching for closure. In the context of Malacañang, she is more than a ghostly warning. She is a symbol, a reminder that grief and loss linger, even in places of power. But what does it all mean for those who walk these halls today? For the presidents and advisors, the guards and cleaners, the cooks and gardeners? Does the presence of the past make their work heavier, or does it give them a sense of purpose? Political instability has always haunted the Philippines. Scandal, corruption, and unrest seem to circle the palace like vultures. Some say the ghosts are drawn out by turmoil, that each crisis wakes new echoes. There are even stories of the palace's most famous ghosts appearing at moments of national decision. President Quezon's restless pacing, the Chinese manservant's silent watch, the Capre's cigar smoke swirling in the breeze. It is as if the spirits are trying to warn the living, urging them to remember the lessons of history. But there is a psychological burden as well. Imagine waking every morning in a place where every wall, every floorboard, every lamp tells a story of power gained and lost, of betrayals and sacrifices. It is no wonder that many leaders have chosen not to live in the palace itself, preferring the relative peace of guest houses or nearby mansions. Historians and psychologists agree the palace is a crucible. The stress of leadership, combined with the weight of history, can create a kind of haunting all its own. Some call it the Malacañang effect, a feeling of being watched, judged, and measured by all who have come before. In other countries, this is sometimes called the burden of the crown. The same sensation is reported in the Élysée Palace in France, Buckingham Palace in England, the Imperial Palace in Japan. Power, it seems, is always accompanied by shadows. Even outside the palace grounds, the stories ripple outward. Neighborhood children dare each other to walk past the iron gates at night. Taxi drivers cross themselves as they drive by, refusing to look at the belay tree. Vendors on the street share tales of seeing a tall, shadowy man smoking beneath its branches, his eyes glowing in the dark. And then there are the dreams. In recent years, more people have come forward with stories of dreaming themselves into the palace, sitting at the great dining table, wandering the empty halls, hearing voices, whispering secrets and warnings. Some awaken with a sense of dread, others with a strange nostalgia, as if they had been given a glimpse of a life not their own. What connects all these stories is the sense that Malacañang is not just a place, but a living memory, a crossroads where the past and present meet. Yet, there is beauty in this burden. In some cultures, the presence of spirits is not a curse, but a blessing, a sign that the ancestors are watching, guiding, and protecting. In the Philippines, respect for the dead is woven into daily life. Offerings are left on All Souls' Day. Old houses are blessed before being occupied. Even in Malacañang, the empty chair at the feast is not just a warning, but a gesture of hospitality, a sign that all are remembered. Submit your stories at storiesphilippines.com. Access exclusive content on Patreon. Find show notes and support options in the description. Now let's pause and listen closely to the stories that have been passed from one generation of staff to the next. Tales that, though frightening, also reveal a special kind of loyalty and pride. For these men and women, the palace is not just a workplace. It is a world unto itself, shaped by the living and the dead. Take the story of Leticia Mendoza, a palace maid who worked under 3 different administrations. She remembered nights when her hands shook as she set the table in the state dining room, always careful to leave the last chair just a little bit out of alignment. "That's for our visitors," her mentor once whispered, "so they know they're not forgotten." Leticia recalled her first real encounter. She was polishing the silverware late one night when she felt a cold breeze sweep past her. The chandelier above flickered, casting odd shadows across the walls. Suddenly, she heard the unmistakable sound of someone settling into the empty chair at the head of the table. The cushion depressed, the chair creaked, but when Letitia looked up, the seat was empty. Heart pounding, she quickly finished her work. As she turned to leave, she heard a soft voice behind her. Just a whisper, but clear as day. "Thank you." She never spoke of it to anyone, but from that night on, she always left a small flower beside the empty place. For Letitia and others, these experiences were not just spooky tales. They were reminders of the dignity and gravity of their roles. Each task, no matter how small, was part of an unbroken chain that stretched back through centuries. To dust the portraits, to polish the floors, to cook a meal. These were acts of remembrance, as much as service. The palace staff developed their own rituals and customs. Some avoided certain mirrors at night, believing they could trap wandering souls. Others refused to whistle in the hallways, fearing it would invite mischievous spirits. And on quiet evenings, you might find a group of guards sharing strong coffee and old stories, each one trying to outdo the last with tales of things seen and heard when the rest of the city was asleep. Yet, even among those who claim not to believe, there is a sense of respect, an acknowledgement that the palace is alive with memory. One maintenance engineer, Victorino Chua, put it best: "You don't have to see a ghost to know you're not alone, you just feel it, like the air is heavier, or someone's watching you from the end of the hall. It keeps you careful, it keeps you humble, but not all hauntings are gentle. Some bear the unmistakable mark of anger, regret, or unfinished business. There are rooms in Malacañang where even the bravest refuse to linger. The old archives, for example, are said to be haunted by the ghosts of those whose secrets were never revealed. Clerks, aides, even former officials who vanished during turbulent times. One archivist, Helena de los Reyes, once described the sensation of being watched as she sorted through old documents. She would sometimes find papers rearranged or files placed back on the wrong shelf, as if someone was searching for something lost long ago. Once, as she worked late into the night, the lights flickered and she heard the sound of heavy breathing behind her. When she turned, a cold mist clung to the shelves, and the room grew icy. Helena hurried from the archives and never returned after dark. There are also stories of apparitions appearing in times of national crisis. Staff have reported seeing the ghost of President Quezon, his face troubled, drifting through the halls during times of political upheaval. Sometimes the Chinese manservant is seen standing at attention near the entrance, as if awaiting a command that will never come. Even Mr. Brown, the capre, has been spotted more frequently during tense periods, his cigar glowing in the night as he watches over the palace. These sightings are not just superstitions, they are woven into the very fabric of palace life. For every new president, there is an invisible audience, a reminder that every decision, every word, is being witnessed by generations past. And so, the palace endures. Its walls absorb the laughter and the sorrow, the ceremonies and the scandals. Each new story, each new haunting, is another thread in the tapestry. The empty chair at the palatial feast is never truly empty. It is filled with the weight of memory, the presence of those who came before, and the hope that those who come after will not forget. Submit your stories at stories@philippines.com. Follow us on social media for daily folklore facts. Malacañang's haunted reputation extends beyond its walls, touching the lives of those who once lived nearby. Stories pour in from listeners, former staff, and their descendants, each one adding another layer to the palace's legend. And such story comes from a woman named Angela Feliciano, whose grandfather served as a gardener during the post-war years. Angela remembers her grandfather's warnings never to stay too late among the palace gardens, especially near the bolete tree after sunset. He would tell her tales of seeing a tall shadow moving under the branches, always just out of sight, the scent of tobacco heavy in the air, Angela recalls one rainy afternoon when she was 8 years old, playing hide and seek among the hedges. She heard a deep, rumbling laugh and turned to see a pair of glowing eyes watching her from the darkness beneath the bele. Frozen in fear, she ran to her grandfather, who simply scooped her up and whispered, "That's Mr. Brown. He means no harm if you respect his place." From then on, Angela always left a small flower at the tree's base whenever she visited. Such rituals, leaving a flower, a bowl of rice, or even a whispered prayer, are not just acts of superstition. They're ways of acknowledging a world beyond what we can see, a world intertwined with our own. In many cultures, from the Philippines to Eastern Europe, people believe that honoring the unseen is a sign of humility and wisdom. For the palace's younger residents, the tales take on a different flavor. There are stories of childhood games interrupted by shadowy figures, of toys moving on their own, of imaginary friends who know far too much about palace history. One boy, Gabriel Valdez, described seeing an old woman in a Spanish Hera dress sitting by his window at night, her eyes full of sadness. She would only vanish when he prayed aloud. These stories may sound fanciful, but psychologists say they serve an important purpose. In places where trauma and upheaval are common, folklore becomes a way for children and adults to process fear and uncertainty. It gives shape to the unspoken, providing comfort through ritual and shared belief. But there are also moments of courage. Some palace staff have reported standing up to the spirits, demanding peace or asking for protection. One security officer, Dennis Santiago, once confronted a shadowy figure during a night patrol. The figure vanished, but Dennis said afterward, "Sometimes you have to show you're not afraid. You have to remind them that you're here to protect everyone, living and dead." And always there is the empty chair. It appears in every story, every room, every memory, a silent invitation, a warning, and a promise. The chair reminds all who see it that history is never finished, that every feast and every meeting is shared with those who have come before. Other countries have their own parallels. In the United States, the Lincoln bedroom in the White House is said to be haunted by the 16th president, with staff and guests reporting sightings and cold spots. In Japan, the Nijo Castle in Kyoto is famous for its nightingale floors, which chirp underfoot to warn of ghosts and assassins alike. Across Europe and Asia, old palaces and government buildings are filled with similar stories. Unexplained noises, vanishing figures, and the sense of being watched. What sets Malacañang apart is the way these stories blend history, folklore, and the realities of political life. In this palace, the supernatural is not just a curiosity. It is a reflection of national character, a reminder of resilience, caution, and the need for humility in the face of power. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson of all. The ghosts of Malacañang do not simply haunt for the sake of haunting. They are guardians, witnesses, and sometimes accusers. They remind the living that every act, good or evil, leaves a mark. They teach that no one, not even the most powerful, can escape the judgment of history. Exclusive content on Patreon. Find show notes and support options in the description. Submit your stories at storiesphilippines.com. Let's step back for a moment and consider the power of a story. The tales of Malacañang, of vanishing figures, strange sounds, and empty chairs are more than entertainment. They are the nation's memory, passed from one generation to the next. They shape how Filipinos think about history, power, and even justice. But what happens when a story is too heavy to bear? For some, the weight of history can be overwhelming. Presidents have fled the palace in times of crisis, seeking refuge in distant safe houses. Staff members have resigned, unable to shake the feeling that their every move is being watched. Visitors report headaches, chills, and unexplained anxiety. Historians say this is not unusual. Buildings that have witnessed great suffering, battlefields, prisons, even schools, often seem to remember what happened within their walls. Modern science calls this residual energy. Psychologists speak of collective trauma, passed down through families and communities. In the Philippines, where every family has a story of struggle, survival, or loss, the ghosts of the past are never far away. Yet, there is also healing. The rituals performed by palace staff, blessings, prayers, offerings, are ways of making peace with the past. Each small act is a declaration. We remember, we respect, we move forward. Some of the most fascinating insights come from theologians who see Malacañang as a place of spiritual contest. Father Miguel Herrera, a priest who has blessed the palace more than once, describes it as a battlefield of souls. He believes that the constant prayers and exorcisms are not just for show, but a genuine effort to drive away darkness and invite peace. Every leader who enters those halls brings their own burdens, says Father Miguel. They are confronted not only by their own conscience, but by the spirits of those wronged or forgotten. This battle is not unique to Malacañang. In ancient Rome, the Vestal Virgins kept a sacred flame burning at the center of the city, believing that the fate of the empire depended on appeasing the gods and the dead. In China, emperors offered sacrifices at ancestral temples before making important decisions. In the Philippines, the empty chair at the palatial feast holds the same role, a point of contact between worlds, a silent dialogue between rulers and the ruled, the living and the dead. But for all the fear and reverence inspired by these stories, there is also a kind of comfort. In a place where power often feels remote and untouchable, the presence of ghosts makes the palace more human. It is a reminder that even the greatest leaders are just people, subject to the same hopes, fears, and regrets as everyone else. One former president, whose name we'll call Amelia Santiago, once told a confidant that she was never truly afraid of the palace ghosts. "If they are here," she said, "it means we are not alone. It means our work matters." Amelia would sometimes walk the halls at night, stopping to greet the portraits and even speaking to the empty air. "I hope they are watching. I hope they see I am trying." Her story is echoed by many others, advisors, guards, even guests, who find solace in the idea that someone is always watching, always remembering. The ghosts of Malacañang are not just reminders of the past, they are witnesses to the ongoing story of the nation. As we near the end of our journey, let's return to where we began, the empty chair at the palatial feast. It is a symbol, a mystery, and a challenge. Each time it appears, during a banquet, a meeting, or even in a dream, it asks a simple question: who is missing? Whose voice was silenced? Whose story remains untold? In a time of political uncertainty, when the nation faces old wounds and new trials, these questions are more important than ever. The palace's ghosts remind us that true power is not in the ability to command, but in the willingness to listen, to the living, to the dead, and to the stories that bind them together. Submit your stories at storiesphilippines.com. Follow us on social media for daily folklore facts. Find show notes and support options in the description. Space exclusive content on Patreon. Every legend, every haunting, every whispered name in Malacañang tells us that history is alive and restless. The country's seat of power is not just a place for politics and ceremony. It is a living museum, a crossroads for the ambitions and mistakes of generations. The empty chair at any official gathering is a silent testimony to this truth. But Malacañang's stories are not only about fear, they are also about resilience, hope, and the possibility of making peace with the past. The palace has survived fires, invasions, revolutions, and scandals. Each time it has been rebuilt, restored, and renewed. This cycle of destruction and renewal is echoed in the stories of its ghosts, spirits who return not to torment, but to remind. to witness, and perhaps to forgive. There are moments when the veil between past and present seems especially thin. During the annual All Saints' Day, candles flicker in windows and prayers float through the air. Staff and security alike share a sense of heightened awareness, as if the palace itself is holding its breath. Some guards report seeing long-dead soldiers standing at attention outside the gates. Others hear music drifting from the music room where no one is playing. And always, there is the empty chair, waiting at the table. For the people who work in Malacañang, these rituals are acts of continuity. They connect today's staff with those who came before: gardeners, cooks, clerks, and presidents. Each act of remembrance, each story shared, is a way of saying, we are not alone, we are part of something larger. Even the smallest gesture, like leaving a flower by Mr. Brown's tree or placing salt in a corner, carries meaning beyond its surface. And for the leaders who walk these halls, the presence of the past is both a burden and a blessing. Some try to ignore it, focusing only on the present. Others embrace it, drawing strength from the knowledge that every decision is part of a much longer story. We are stewards, not owners, one president once said. We borrow this place from those who came before and from those who will come after. As listeners, we might ask, why do we keep telling these stories? Why do we return again and again to the tales of haunted halls and invisible guests? Perhaps it is because we recognize ourselves in them. We too are haunted by unfinished business and silent regrets. We too hope that we will be remembered, that our actions will matter. Across the world, haunted palaces and empty chairs serve as reminders of the fragility of power and the persistence of memory. In Versailles, Windsor, the White House, and the Forbidden City, the most powerful people have had to face their own shadows. Malacañang belongs in this company, a place where the living and the dead share the same table, and where every feast is attended by more than meets the eye. So, the next time you see an empty chair at a gathering, pause for a moment. Ask yourself, who might be joining us, unseen? Whose absence is being honored? And what stories are waiting to be told? The ghost of Malacañang will not offer easy answers. They will not resolve the mysteries of the past. What they offer instead is a challenge: to remember, to listen, and to be humble in the face of history. Submit your stories at storiesphilippines.com. Find show notes and support options in the description. Access exclusive content on Patreon. Follow us on social media for daily folklore facts. As our story draws to a close, let's return once more to that grand candlelit dining hall. Imagine the scene: polished floors reflecting the light of chandeliers, the portraits of leaders past watching from gilded frames, the air thick with the aroma of old wood and history. At the great table, the seats fill with guests, some living, some gone, some only remembered in stories. Yet at the end of the table there remains a single empty chair. It is here, at the intersection of past and present, that we confront the true weight of power. Malacañang is not just a palace. It is a mirror, reflecting the nation's triumphs and failures, its hopes and heartbreaks. Each ghostly tale, each unexplained sound, each flickering light is a reminder that the past cannot be shut away or forgotten. It demands to be witnessed. In every culture, the haunted house is more than just a place of fear. It is a place of reckoning. It asks us to face what we would rather ignore: the debts unpaid, the apologies unspoken, the dreams deferred. The ghosts of Malacañang are not here to terrify. They are here to remind us that we are part of a story that did not begin with us and will not end when we are gone. For every leader who has entered those halls, the lessons are clear. Power does not erase the past, it inherits it. The empty chair at the palatial feast is a challenge. Will you listen to the voices that came before, or will you repeat their mistakes? Will you honor the sacrifices or add to the burdens? The palace's ghosts are not just relics of a superstitious age. They are the soul of a nation, asking the living to be better, to remember, to choose wisely. For all who have lived or worked in the shadow of Malacañang, the stories carry both warning and hope. The palace has been a place of heartbreak and healing, tyranny and liberation, silence and song. It is a reminder that even in the most powerful places, the human heart is fragile, and the line between justice and injustice is thin. So tonight, as you listen to this story, consider your own empty chairs. Who are the people you remember? The ones whose absence still shapes your life? What stories do you carry? What ghosts do you honor? In the end, we are all haunted, not just by the dead, but by the possibilities we have yet to explore. A quote from an old palace caretaker lingers in the mind. The walls can't speak, but they remember, and so must we. And from an elder statesman reflecting on years of service. To lead is to be haunted, but to be haunted is to be human. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, subscribe, follow, and share the podcast. Support Stories Philippines in any way you can. Find financial support options in the show notes, access exclusive content on Patreon, and submit your own stories at storiesphilippines.com. Don't forget to follow us on social media for daily folklore facts. I am Paul, and you have been listening to Stories Philippines podcast. I invite you to reflect. What empty chairs surround your table? What stories are waiting to be told? And if you wander the halls of power, will you remember to listen for the voices that history leaves behind? Join us for the next episode when we return to Malacañang for part 2. More secrets, more shadows, and perhaps more answers. Until then, keep your eyes open, your heart humble, and your mind curious. Good night. Thank you for listening to the Stories Philippines podcast. Don't forget to submit your stories at storiesphilippines.com. Check out the show notes for ways to support and explore more episodes past and future. Stay curious, stay brave, and remember, every great story begins with a question. Which ghosts will you meet, and what tales will you leave behind? Stay tuned for the next part in the next episode.